Welcome to the Marc Steiner Show here on the Real News. I'm Marc Steiner. And before I introduce my guests, I'm going to say this is another conversation about what's happening in Israel-Palestine, another piece of Not in Our Name series, and one that's becoming increasingly difficult for me to cover without breaking down in tears myself when I watch what happened from the moment that Hamas crossed the border to Israel's insane response to the thousands killed. And watching this go on, there's something very different about this moment than anything else I've covered or been part of when it comes to Israel-Palestine over my 50-plus years of being active in this world. So I'm having a series of conversations with many people. And the woman I'm talking to today is someone who I've known through our work here at the Real News, though she no longer works at Real News. And she's one of the first people I turned to on many levels, but on this particular topic, this issue of life. Lia Tarachansky. She's a journalist and a filmmaker, an artist, a multimedia artist, born in the Soviet Union, but she's an Israeli who now lives in Canada. She's an incredible filmmaker, and we've done programs about her work in film, On the Side of the Road, Ethnocracy, Israel's African Refugees, her experimental film Ocean. She's won Best Women in Film and Shorts Awards. She's just an amazing human being, an activist and an artist, and a former comrade here, co-worker here at Real News, who's got her wits about her and is not at Real News anymore. Welcome, Leah. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Mark. I hope somebody does that for you in the beginning of your show.
Thank you. So I don't even know where to begin sometimes. I read the piece that you wrote that was extremely powerful and moving. 11 days have passed is what you called it. And I almost don't know where to begin anymore. I mean, this moment seems so different, whether it was my first experience in 67 in the 67 war and every war that happened since, and all the killings of Palestinians and the murders of Israelis and all that's gone on in these 50 plus years, but something profoundly seems to have shifted. And I don't know, maybe I should be getting more emotional because I'm getting older. I'm not sure, but something seems different.
Yeah, this moment is, to me, distinctly different. I think a couple of things are going on at the same time. Israel has been moving in a particular direction, and my films and the work of many journalists, most of them Israeli and Palestinian, has been illustrating how the dissolution of democratic institutions by the Netanyahu governments starting in 2009 with the introduction of a whole slate of anti-democratic laws that eroded every aspect of what we would normally call democracy inside of Israel for Jews. There's, of course, the structural issue of Israel being an ethnocracy and not a democracy. But for Jewish people, the democratic institutions for Jewish people have been on a very slow and very extreme path of destruction. We've seen the rise of theocracy in Israel and the suppression of secular forces in favor of a very fundamentalist understanding of temple time Jewishness, which is a Jewishness most Jews don't want to return to. And at the same time, there has been a rise in, or like a very steady institutionalization and cementing of the colonial occupation of Palestine that has, and at the same time, there has been a very kind of normalization and permanence to the colonial occupation of Palestine, both in the West Bank and in Gaza. And it became very normal to control millions of people. And it became kind of a thing that we just took for granted. And for the last 15 years, a lot of us have been saying, if this particular thing goes on, it's going to lead to that. If the dehumanization of African refugees is going to go on, it's going to lead to this. It's going to lead to this. It's going to lead to this. If you keep 2 million Palestinians in Gaza under brutality for decades, it's going to lead to an explosion. And what I think the moment we're living in right now is that all of those forces have intersected, and the anti-Netanyahu demonstrations this year, which have been the biggest protest movement in Israel's history, illustrate just how much frustration there is that average Israelis were willing to um, take pretty big risks in order to protest their complete destruction of the Israeli democracy and the uber centralization of the Israeli economy in the hands of a dozen families. So, the steady movement of all of these things, each of them would have been catastrophic, and all of them meeting together has been catastrophic. And I also think that this moment feels very different because of, in the second Intifada, Israelis were being killed by Hamas and Hezbollah and other movements. Um, I'm the generation that grew up with buses exploding and civilians getting targeted by Hamas and hundreds of Israelis getting murdered in terrorist attacks um, that have touched every person that I know, including myself. Um, so the particular nature of the attack that happened on October 7th is not new for us. Israelis have been killed in terrorist attacks every year for the past decades. But um, something is different about this one because in Israel, we have normalized the siege on Gaza so much that it became just a part of the reality. It was not on the news. Sorry. It was not on the news. It was not discussed. If you go to Elam, which is a wonderful media um, literacy institution, and it's an institution that studies the media in Israel Palestine, Elam, you'll find that Palestinians in general were discussed in the Israeli discourse, in the news, in the public sphere, and almost not at all. So the fact that what happened on October 7th happened, and the bursting of the dam that led to people breaking through what we just assumed were impenetrable barriers, that feels different because in the second Intifada, we still didn't have the same kind of apartheid segregation that we have now, and that was pretty solid. You still could go in and out of Gaza pretty easily. You could go in and out of every part of the West Bank pretty easily. And today we live in a world where we just sealed off 2 million Palestinians in Gaza and just assumed that they will just deal with whatever. And the dam has burst, and they have reminded us that they are alive and well and that we need to deal with the mess that we made. Um, the way that happened in the form of the atrocities that were perpetrated against civilians, I think also was so horrific that people who wrote off the Israel-Palestine conflict into the kind of back pages of failed experiments in human history could not ignore anymore. It was so violent, so brutal, so horrific. It surpassed even the most horrific nightmares that most of us have had. And the Israeli army's response has been so brutal and so horrific and has surpassed the worst nightmares we've ever had of them just carpet bombing the the Gaza Strip and preparing for a massive land invasion with hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The response is so horrific, and I think that the level of the violence, I think that the different historical things that have led to this, and the fact that what happens in Israel Palestine in this modern interconnected world we live in doesn't stay in Israel Palestine. Um, I have no doubt that what happened is more connected to the US Russia Cold War than it does to Israel or Palestine. I think that the ramifications of what's happening to Jewish and Muslim communities around the world is evidence of how this is not these localized conflicts cannot be maintained and contained anymore, because we live in a completely interconnected world. And the war of misinformation has been a front line in a way that we haven't seen in the past. And I think that all of these things have converged in a way that is horrifying. And I will also like to add that something interesting is also happening, in the sense that I think the humanization of the Israeli victims has also allowed us to come up with a third way of looking at this. And I think that in the protest movements and solidarity movements, as well as in the larger public, in the larger society, we have gotten so comfortable with sidism, with this idea of like, well, I was in this, I was cheering for this team, and now I'm cheering for that team, and I can only speak to this team. Okay, now I can only speak to that team. I think that that idea has shattered, and we need to come up with something better. We need to come up with something that holds space for the fact that an oppressor can also be a victim, for the fact that a victim can also be an oppressor, and for the fact that if we're going to find a way out of this hellhole, it's going to be through holding space and building something that is that has humanity and compassion for people. And I think that we haven't been in that place before, in this, to this extent.
You said a lot. You know, I
Sorry.
no, nothing to be sorry for. That's what these moments are for, especially at this time. I mean, we've seen this where, I think, as you put it, 3,000 Palestinians have been killed, at least 1,400 Israelis, maybe 200 people kidnapped. I read a report this morning, it could be close to 900 children killed in Gaza, maybe six. Other reports said six. I'm not sure what the real number is. I'm not sure anybody knows what the real number is.
You can't know what the real number is, because the majority of the killed are stuck under rubble.
And some may be alive under that rubble. An unimaginable horror. Given the rightward shift of Israel, as is happening across the globe, but the rightward shift in Israel, and even in terms of the Palestinian liberation movement, I would consider Hamas a rightward shift, no matter what they think they are otherwise. And that so many Israelis who were on the left, so many Israelis who want to bring a peace between Palestinians and Israelis to fruition, are gone.
They're not gone. They're shocked. They're shocked because within hours of the attack taking place, they're people that they've been protesting alongside of and have dedicated their life fighting for, have said that it's justified and celebrated it. And, when we fight for decolonization, we fight for principles. And in a moment where something horrific happened to us, a lot of the left just rolled over it like it doesn't even matter. Like, those are not people. Like, the fact that we live in an oppressive country means that we deserve to die. And I think that that was a very brutal awakening. And I think that that is a huge failure of the left, and that we're going to have to do some big soul searching about what it is that we're fighting for.
And even from what I've read and people I've talked to, that many of the Israelis who were killed on the 7th of October were on the left.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that people who are not on the left deserve to die.
No, of course not. Of course not.
A lot of people who were kidnapped and killed are people who dedicated their life to peace and justice. And their life is as big of the loss of their life, and the fact that they are currently, in this precarious situation as hostages, is a tragedy, the same as any other person. And I think that, like I said, the left is going to have to do a lot of soul searching, because if the way that you can fight for Palestinians is by dehumanizing other people, it means that you're not fighting for your principles. You're fighting for a new flag, and I'm not interested in taking on another nationalism after denouncing one.
No, I understand completely, and I don't. I agree. But I guess what I'd like to talk a little bit about is where you see it going and how when you see that the massive protests that took place in Israel wasn't about Palestinians, but it was against Netanyahu for the most part. When you see the rightward shift across both entities, Palestinian and Israeli, and when you see this moment, which we both said at the very beginning of the conversation, feels very different, in part because of the death of the Israelis, but also because the thousands of Palestinians being killed at this moment as we're speaking together. I don't even know how to say this sometimes. How do you see this playing out? How do you see what can come out of this? Is there light that can come out of this extremely dark moment?
I think Israel and Palestine uh, is a place where the the intensity of what it means to be human is extremely intense. Um, and it's a place that is quite sacred to a lot of people, and it's a place where even the most unspiritual of us feel something very powerful. And I think that it's a place that has seen the worst of humanity, and it has seen the most beautiful things in humanity. And I think that if you are able to go out into the streets and yell, Jews and Arabs refuse to be enemies after your children have been kidnapped, then that is light. And I think that if you can remember that we are trying to build something different, the decolonization is not just flipping the table and making a new oppressor, that decolonization is creating a new space, then you can create light. And I think that this has been a moment of some really difficult tests for a lot of people. I think that if we use this moment to assert our humanity and to assert that we will hold space and keep in our hearts, um, and center the people who are the most directly impacted by this, then I think we can create light. I don't think that it's a thing that happens from the sky. It's something that we create. And I've seen a lot of Jewish people um, rise up and show up and stand in solidarity. And I've seen a lot of Palestinians reach out and stand and assert their humanity, and Israelis and condemn the atrocities that Hamas perpetrated. And I've seen the best of humanity in these last 13 days. Um, and I think that those are the voices, and that's the work that we need to highlight. Um, and what impact will it have on global politics? I don't think anybody can seriously look you in the eye and tell you the answer to that.
You said it seemed like you were saying that Israelis came out saying we don't need to have this war with Arabs.
Absolutely.
So tell me about that. Something we've missed. Clearly, our press is not covering that.
Yeah, there's been anti-war protests all over the country. A lot. Netanyahu is being dragged over the coals right now by the Israeli press. The business as usual is not going on in Israel. And a lot of people are against the way that this has been playing out. Unfortunately, as I said, when you spend 15 years destroying democratic institutions, you criminalize public protests and you criminalize free speech. And we've seen in the last few days waves of arrests of anybody that has the courage to say no to this war, especially targeting Palestinian citizens of Israel. Um, you know, uh, People who one person was arrested for saying God is bigger than all of this mess. They were arrested for that. We've seen a few incidences like that in the past, but for that to be a wave of silencing, a wave of arrests is a shocking. An Israeli woman who held a sign that said Jews and Arabs refuse to be enemies was arrested, and the sign was taken from her. The peace movement in Israel and Palestine is alive and well like ever before, and it's a lot louder and a lot more prominent than almost anywhere else. And I think that the fact that your press is not covering it has a lot to do with the fact that the United States is trying to make this about the United States, and in the way that Russia has tried to make this about Russia. And I think that Biden arriving in Israel and giving the speech that he gave, um, it is a revolting manifestation of that.
Revolting, you said?
Yes.
Yep, yep. His coming to Israel was more about his votes in America, that he thinks are about his votes in
Yeah,
America.
everybody's using it for their votes. People are paying attention now for their own selfish reasons. I get it. Russia is manipulating Hamas and Iran and Lebanon for its own selfish reasons. I get it. I get that that's how politics works. But we are used to being used in the global chess game of politics. That has been the truth for us for the majority of our existence as a state, and for Palestinians for the majority of their existence under various empires. And I think that that's not new. But I do think that the volume of it happening, as practiced on Ukraine and as now perpetrated on Israel and Palestine, is revolting.
So, I mean, clearly the Israeli government's part of its endgame here is taking over a good portion of the Gaza Strip and pushing people out of it.
No, Israel doesn't have an end game.
What do you mean?
The Israeli government doesn't have an end game.
You're saying they don't have a strategy for how they want to pursue this war? What I mean,
The Israeli army has had multiple strategies that have been put in place over decades. The Israeli government doesn't have an end game for this. This is going to be a war on multiple fronts involving several nations and several international powers, and Israel does not have an end game for this. The Israeli government has been reactionary for the majority of its existence, at least in the last 15 years. And I think Netanyahu, in an all-time low, facing 4 criminal investigations and a mass movement that has been calling for him to step down, is basically just fighting for his life to stay in the political sphere. There is no end game. I think that this idea that there is an end game is one of the products of the conspiracy theory left.
interesting. When Israel does this almost genocidal act of telling Palestinians to leave and move, go further to the east, is one of the reasons I said it seemed as if Israel wanted to come in to create themselves to create
the South.
Yeah, excuse me, to the south, right?
There is no thing as Israel. There is the country of Israel that has many different powers that are struggling to manifest their interests at the same time, like in any other country. The government of Israel, which is responsible, whose emergency cabinet is responsible for the overall strategy here, is working with the military elite who have their own strategies, and each one of them has their own interests. I don't believe that the moving people to the south has to do with annexing land. I think that it has to do with the desire to, as one Israeli pundit said, bomb Gaza into the Stone Age. And I think that the point here is to have a very strong response, a kind of show of force that would be brutal beyond imagination and total beyond imagination, because what Hamas did is show to the world that Israel's so-called superior military, superior arms arsenal, superior defense systems are fallible. And I think that Israel's economy has been dependent on Israel's war machine, selling arms to the world and illustrating that it has achieved some kind of military supremacy. And while that's all true, Hamas has blown a giant hole in the middle of all of that. And I think that the only thing pushing the Israeli military right now is a kind of desire to have a decisive show of force that would illustrate to all of Israel's enemies that actually, no, if you come at us, we will kill the last of you and your children. And it's a kind of brutal, genocidal kind of approach to global politics. But it's also not working. The Palestinian resistance has not subsided as a result of the brutality of Israel's bombardment. Hezbollah has not subsided its rocket attacks on northern Israel. Russia and all of the other players in this game have continued the cyber attacks and all the various less visible forms of their solidarity with of their support for the people fighting Israeli soldiers right now, and this has only made everything worse and has only ramped everything up to 11. So no, I don't think that there's an end game. I think that this is a reactionary war, and I think that we know very well what the Israeli government's interests are in general, and we know very well what the surrounding nations' interests are, and everyone is fighting for their interests at the expense of the Gazan people and the Israelis.
Just two quick things here. As you were speaking, I was thinking about this. I've been thinking about this a lot in news and writing about it, which is, I went back to kind of read the story of Masada, and where all the Israelis of ancient Israel were wiped out. And it feels in some ways that what people have attempted to do to Jews for 1,000 years or more, Israel is doing it to ourselves, setting that up. I mean, it's, I think about my the stories that I grew up with from the pogroms with my Bubby grandfather, and what happened, the horrendous things that happened to them as they fled Poland. I think about all of my cousins who sat in my living room with numbers in their arms, growing up as a kid and knowing what that meant. But I think this moment somehow we are sowing the seeds for our own destruction that other people have attempted to do.
No, I mean, I think that this big picture shit, you forgive my language, is
so you can say whatever you like, Lia.
I mean, yeah, it's true that when the early Zionist movement came to Palestine and perpetrated the Nakba, they were importing the actions of their oppressors,
right?
And that they used what they knew, and the fact that at that time in the 40s, many different populations were being displaced en masse in Poland, in Latvia, in Czechoslovakia, in Ukraine. It was part of the way that business of war was being done. The mass dispossession of Jews out of Arab countries is another example of it. And I think that the context is important. The oppressed came to Palestine and brought the oppression with them, and the oppressed Palestinians are bringing the oppression they have learned from the Israeli army of indiscriminately killing everybody in sight to Israel. And I think that this kind of inheritance of rape and oppression and murder can only lead to all of our destruction. And I think that it is our job to remember that underneath the game that Russia's playing, and underneath the game that America is playing, and underneath all of the layers of complexity, there are people that live here, that live in Israel, and that live in Palestine, and they are not, no matter what they believe, no matter what they've been brought up in their educational system to believe, they don't deserve what is going on right now, that we all deserve better than this. And we live in an interconnected world. The war on Ukraine has illustrated that very clearly. If you don't care about people, if you just care about your economy, already the war in Gaza is having impact on the movement of gas. Chevron just shut down its oil fields, its gas fields in Israel. This is going to come to you, whether you care about it or not. There have been people murdered because they are Palestinian or Muslim or Jewish around the world as retaliation for what's going on in Israel-Palestine. And that kind of violence is going to come closer and closer to you. And so all of us are implicated in this, and all of us have a responsibility to keep and to hold space for the humanity that we want to take forward into this 21st century that so far has been very disappointing.
Lia, as we close together today, I really do appreciate you taking the time to do all this today. When we were writing back and forth, you introduced me to your friend Samar Sabawi, and she read this poem that her father wrote, Abdul Karim Sabawi. So I want to close with that and her poem. Just introduce her. Talk to me a bit about, to all of our listeners here, about her and what they're about to hear.
Sure. Samah Sabawi is a remarkable person. I met her when we were both invited to do a presentation in Israel and Palestine to government employees in Canada. And I remember in 2009, we were sitting on a train and talking about how can this horror continue when Israel attacked Gaza and cast lead. And 15 years later, it's astonishing that we are still asking ourselves, how can this go on? But Samah Sabawi was born in 1967, and even though her family was displaced out of Gaza, her father decided to call her Samah, which your Arabic listeners would know means forgiveness. Her father, Abdul Karim, and her are both poets. They're beautiful poets who speak in a way that rips through your heart. Besides being brilliant in a number of different ways, Samah is also a world premiering and award-winning playwright. And I think that her plays, if they haven't played in your city, they will soon. She lives in Australia right now, and she's raising beautiful families with of her children, and is probably skipping a lot of nights of sleep worrying about her relatives and her husband's relatives in Gaza.
We're about to hear her voice, her poem written by her father, Abdul Karim Sabawi, read by Samah Sabawi and Lia Tarachansky. I always love talking with you, and I'm sorry every time we talk it has to be with such pain that swirls around us, but it is. And I'm glad you're there to help tell the story. And I'm glad you are always ready to talk together with me. So thank you very much, and I hope we see each other soon.
Thanks, Marc.
In 1967, my father, Abdul Karim Sabawi's home city, Gaza, fell under Israeli occupation. He, like many other Palestinians, was uprooted and forced into exile for the rest of his life. He wrote this poem on that painful first morning when he woke up in Jordan to realize he may never be allowed to return. The poem was translated from Arabic into English by me, yours truly, and it's a poem that he never actually published in Arabic because he says it's one that is too painful for him to relive and to remember. I actually found the poem written in one of his old transcript files, and I brought it with me since, and I translated it into English. The poem is called Erasure. When you were parched, we quenched your thirst with our blood. Now we carry your burden disgraced. We cry in shame when asked, where do you come from? Dishonored, we die. If only the stray bullets from the occupiers' guns were merciful, that they pierced through our legs. If only they tore through our knees. If only we sunk in your sand deep to our necks. If only we got stuck and became the salt of your earth, the nutrients in your fertile soil. If only we didn't leave. The gates of our hearts are wide open to misery. Don't ask us where this wind is blowing. Don't ask about a house or windows or trees. The bulldozers were here. The bulldozers were here. And the houses in our village, they fell like a row of decayed teeth. They haven't colonized Mars yet, and the moon is barren, uninhabitable. So carry your children, your memories, and follow me. We can live in the books of history. They'll write about us. The wicked Bedouins landed in Baghdad. They landed in Jaffa. They landed in Granada. They moved on. They packed their belongings and rode on their camels. They didn't leave their print on the red clay, and they didn't leave any artifacts. The ones they left were faded with the passing of the years. Does anyone in the world care? Does anyone care? What is it worth to be an Arab or a Native American or a dinosaur?
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please, tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.